Hello, everyone. Welcome to the How to Level Up Your Self-Editing Skills panel during writehive's annual conference in July of 2026. I'm your moderator and facilitator, AP Hawkins. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a founder and editor of Tomeworks, an editing collective dedicated to helping genre fiction authors build better books. And I'm also a science fiction and fantasy writer. My short fiction has been published in Analog, Escape Pod, and other markets. For our low vision attendees, I'm wearing a white shirt with some green lettering. Now, this panel is a discussion of self-editing processes and how to improve those skills. As a writer who edits not only my own work, but also other authors' work professionally, I'm really excited about this discussion because editing is actually my favorite part of the writing process. So I think we're going to have a really great discussion with all of our panelists today. At the end, all of our panelists will have a chance to let the audience know how to follow them on social media and about their new projects. But I'd like to start right now by giving each of our wonderful panelists a chance to introduce themselves. So if we could start with Sarah and then everyone just take a turn to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Joy Adams. I'm the author of Steel Mill Vikings, as well as the Iced Chronicles. The fourth book of that is already out. It's Summer's Regent, and the final book of that is due next year. We will be sending it to the editor come hell or high water by the end of this month. So my pronouns are she, her, and I'm wearing a black t-shirt with lace sleeves and a small dragon brooch.
Hi, I'm Rachanee Lumayno. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a YA fantasy novelist. My latest book, nope, wrong way, Seeing Red, is a dark gothic fairy tale. That's my new series, Dark Gothic Fairy Tale Retellings. That one's based off Little Red Riding Hood. I'm wearing pink on pink, a pink sweater and a pink shirt because I love pink. So,
Very good. Thank you. James.
I'm James Lloyd Dulin, he, him. I'm an adult fantasy novelist. My first work out was No Heart for a Thief, and the completed Malitu trilogy is out and available. For those with visual impairment, I'm wearing a gray button-down polo.
Thank you. Heather.
Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Ang, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a third generation Chinese American writer who grew up in Queens, New York. For our low vision attendees, I'm wearing a pink V-neck t-shirt. My debut novel, Double Happiness, just came out from Tiny Reparations Books, Penguin Random House. It's the story of Mei Lee, a 36-year-old late bloomer who finally has it all until, right before her wedding, an unexpected new love interest makes her rethink her hard-won love, life, and career choices.
All right, great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So to start off our discussion here, can you all quickly define self-editing? Particularly for our kind of newer authors, kind of give us a brief definition of what self-editing is and one step that the process may entail for you. Let's start with Heather this time.
Okay, so for me, self-editing refers to reading my own work with a critical eye as if someone else wrote it, and then noting down all the changes I like to make. And for me, one thing that really works is to print out my entire manuscript and then have a hard copy of it. And I was a little bit skeptical of this at first. This was a piece of advice that I was given by a writing teacher, Jennifer Close, and I was thinking, why do I need to print it out? Can I read it on screen? But I have found that having a hard copy of my work helps me have some more distance from it as if it's someone else's writing. And it also makes me less precious with it. So I'm more apt to X out things that don't work and say, no, this whole section needs to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually do the same thing. I print out my manuscripts and I read them aloud to myself. That's like the first thing that I do. So what about the rest of y'all? Who would like to go next?
I'll go before somebody takes all my advice. Um, So self-editing to me, I think of it just like I think of all editing. It comes in different stages. So you have developmental editing, you have line editing, you have proofreading. And so self-editing to me is when I take on those roles at different stages within my writing process. Like Heather said, I try to distance myself from it and look at it as a reader and an editor rather than the person who created that work. And depending on what role I'm taking, I'm looking for different kinds of things to correct in the story, whether it be plot holes, whether it be dialogue choices, or simple grammar. And my suggestion for people who are doing some self-editing is at the very least read out your dialogue lines. Read out your whole manuscript if you have the energy for it, but dialogue needs to be heard in order for you to and sound it out, get the cadence of it, or else it can read very unnaturally.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great advice. What about Sarah and Rashini? What about you guys?
Um, I like to remember that good writing is rewriting, something I tell my students a lot. Um, my self-editing is a combination of revising as I go, I move forward, and that changes my perspective on what I did before. And so I change up things as I go, but also finishing a whole draft. Like a couple of you others said, print the whole thing out and read it as an entire book because um, there's a forest trees problem when you're editing your own work or creating your own work. This one scene feels awesome. Okay, but does it fit with the pacing and the plot and the voice of the character? And maybe the the scene is showing you a new direction to go, or maybe that scene needs to go in the maybe later pile and doesn't fit well within the book you're writing. So I always I try to remind myself that revision literally comes from revision, right? You have to see your book differently in order to notice what you didn't notice as you were writing it.
Mhm. Yeah.
I tend to view self-editing as, so I'm a pantser, which can be to my detriment. And I view self-editing as something I need to do during my first maybe 1.1, 1.5 draft. So I don't have to rewrite the whole darn thing when I'm done, which is something I'm currently experiencing now. And probably my best trick in the thing is I'm an audiobook narrator as well. So when I
Mhm.
narrate my audiobook, I use that as like my close to final draft for polish, where I can catch any sort of context mistakes, grammar mistakes, and stuff like that. And I have had to go back and be like, "Ooh, that does not work," and like rewrite the whole book or a whole section, and then do it again in the audio. But like you were saying, James, reading it aloud really does make a difference.
Mhm. Yeah, it really does. Now, Rashni, that actually made me curious. You said you're a pantser, and for our audience members who may not be familiar with that term, that's a term I believe it came out of National Novel Writing Month, but that means that you prefer to write by the seat of your pants. Without doing very much or any prior planning. You just sit down and start writing. But I am curious, because you mentioned that, I'm curious if any of you all um, kind of struggle with the urge to kind of edit before you're ready. Do you struggle with the urge to edit while you're still in that very first draft and you haven't finished a complete draft yet? And how do you kind of deal with that?
There is a book saved somewhere that is about half done from very many years ago that I never got past probably the first 10, 15 chapters on because I just kept on going back and rewriting
Mm.
and rewriting and rewriting, and it was my perfectionism kicking in. And I was never able to finish telling that story. So when it came to No Heart for a Thief, I had to just never look back for that first full draft. Just get it on the page. 'Cause
Mhm.
The biggest thing with editing is you can't edit words that aren't there. And so I had to get it done before I even touched a single word. And it was a mess by the time I touched it, but at least it was written. So that was my first hurdle.
Yeah.
I'm with you, James. I'm my perfectionism, my need to get it perfect before I move forward is one of my biggest enemies as a writer. I for Steel Mill Vikings, I rewrote the first chapter so many times and I knew it wasn't starting in the right place. I knew and And I finally realized I wasn't going to figure out how to make it right until I finished the book. So I stopped rewriting the first chapter and made myself go forward. And it it worked. And sure enough, by the end of the book, I was like, oh, this is where the book starts. It has to start, scrap the whole thing, write a new one. So I ended up writing the first chapter last, which was an odd moment. There's this saying in Hollywood, we'll fix it in post. Um, you can hand wave any problem with the phrase "we'll fix it in post." And when I'm co-writing the Changelings Fall series, I write with a co-author, Emily Levin Leverett, and we've started using that as shorthand for, we know this is a problem, but we have to keep the project moving forward. And so often those problems work themselves out if you move forward. Then you'll realize, oh, that's how to do it. So yeah, we'll fix it in post has become my anti-mantra to my perfectionism that keeps me from moving forward.
I'm laughing at that because I'm an actress and
Yeah.
I've actually produced projects and we did say fix it in post and it was the worst thing we ever did trying to fix it in post. It's funny.
There are times you can't.
Right? Yeah, you just have to. Speaking of fixing in post, this is actually something that I'm dealing with in my current book in this series, which is all the dark gothic fairy tale retellings. For me, it's never an issue of self-editing, like, oh, this phrasing isn't perfect. It's more like because I didn't do my research in time. And as I'm working on it, so for example, the current book I'm working on is based off of the Little Match Girl. And I started doing lore based off of like the Land of Fairy. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm going to change it to Filipino mythology. Well, guess what? I hadn't researched that. And I had to change a lot of stuff content wise because it didn't fit. So that's where the self-editing came into play, where I'm like, ooh, I should have done my research and homework before this, because now I have to go over 30 chapters and make sure there's no continuity errors later on that'll bite me in the butt. So
I would agree with Sarah and James. It is very hard to keep writing when you want to go back and re-edit what you've done, but you really do need to push through because even after you finish that first draft, you will rewrite your novel over and over and over again. And it's much easier to edit, like James said, words that are already there than starting from scratch. So I agree. Just push through, get that first draft down. You'll keep rewriting and polishing.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a hard time like shutting up that editor voice in my brain too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I always have to remind myself, the first draft just has to exist. It doesn't have to be perfect. And one thing that I find really helpful to like get past that is I leave comments to myself. Like when I'm drafting and I notice something and the editor brain is like, hey, you need to fix this. Hey, I'll leave a comment. And so that actually, when I print out my manuscript and I read it to myself and then I come back, I have a starting point of like edits to make or like places that need edits. So, yeah, so we've talked a little bit about some of the things that we all do to in the self-editing process. But I kind of want to talk about that in a little more detail. So like what are the different steps that you all may take in well, like when you are self-editing? What does your process kind of look like from um, start to maybe not start to finish, but like start to, I've done enough, right? Like what steps do you take throughout your process?
Well, I think that one important thing is to take a long break from your manuscript. And I know that can be really challenging because you just finished and you're like, "Oh, I can't wait to get in there and to revise everything." But I think it's very helpful to take as long as you can, even whether it's a couple months, whether it's almost a year. I have found that for me, the longer I spend away from my manuscript, the more I can read it with a critical eye. And that's when the big changes, like the big changes that need to be made, can really happen. So I take as long as I can, and then I will print it out, read it as if someone else wrote it, mark it up, and then retype the entire thing from start to finish.
My editing process is constantly being edited itself. With every book, I am trying something a little bit different, or I'm uh, trying to make my editing process a little bit more efficient. I think my first book went through at least 10, if not 11 full edits from start to beginning. And that's a lot if you're trying to publish on a regular basis. And so I go in and I try to pick which lens I'm looking at this manuscript this go around. So after my first draft, I am going in with developmental edits, and I'm only looking at that. I'm not worrying about grammar as much. I'm not worrying if this sounds perfect. I am focusing on plot points, plot holes. I'm looking to make sure the story and the themes make sense throughout, the character arcs make sense. That's what I'm looking at the first go around. And then each time I go back, I'm taking a different point of view as an editor so that I don't get bogged down in this chapter isn't perfect yet. Well, this chapter
Mhm.
has it makes sense in the story. That's what it first needs to do. And then we can get to the other stuff.
I tend to think of it in terms of global edits and then local edits and line, which roughly aligns with the editorial terms that houses use, publishing houses use of developmental and copy editing, and then and line editing. The first time through, I am when I'm reading a whole manuscript that I've written, I am looking for, does the plot make sense? Um, is the pacing working, right? Are there any points where I get bored? Because if I'm bored with it, the reader's definitely going to be bored. And character development and consistency, like, is this character doing themselves or doing their actual character? Characters should change, right? I want my characters to develop, but I don't want my characters to suddenly take a hard left turn into, oh, I clearly just forced them to do something because it advanced the plot rather than that's what their character would actually do. Um, and then when I try to work those things out, um, then I can look at questions like, do these lines work? Does this dialogue sound really good? Can I polish the language, the diction? Do each of the characters have their individual voices expressing themselves well? I always want to dive right into like the line edit level, and then my co-author will pull me back, be like, hey, we have this like chapter in the middle that doesn't need to be there. We're not polishing it. We need to eliminate it. So I try to pace my own editing that way.
Can I just say you guys are so patient because I'm like, so my first book was 17 drafts and I was like, never again. So I'm trying so hard to do like a 4 to 5 draft thing and it's done. So I'll do the first draft and that's the like get it out draft. I'll go over it after it's done and be like, okay, does this all make sense? Catch any grammar or whatever, fix whatever doesn't make sense. Then I'll send it off to my editor. He'll send it back. We'll fight about it. It'll be great. And then I'll do the audiobook version. And that's where I catch like all the final stuff for grammar, for like things that don't make sense. But I tend to be like, my first instinct should be the best one. So I don't stress too much over like, does this sentence sound perfect? Or, should they be going here and not there? I'm just like, because I kind of write like improv, honestly. So I'm just like, yes, and all right, let's go. And I don't like stressing over a project. Having a project hanging over my head stresses me out more than like stressing over it. So that's why I'm like, I just need to be done with it. That's why I'm like 5 drafts and I'm done. So you guys are like my heroes because I don't have this kind of patience. So kudos.
Yeah, I also don't have the patience for that many drafts. My kind of goal when I'm editing is to minimize the number of drafts that I have to do. I tend to, when I kind of dive in to my self-editing, I kind of tend to um, start by doing everything at once. And then once everything's fixed the way I want it, I do like a final copy editing pass to find typos. But I do want to ask y'all, because some terms have come up a couple of times, that I think it may be helpful for us to kind of define what they are for newer authors who might not be familiar. So we've talked about a couple of times developmental editing, line editing, and copy editing. Can you all briefly go through and kind of give a brief definition of what those terms mean for people who might not be familiar?
And I may be wrong. This is the way I use them.
Mhm.
Developmental editing is when I'm thinking about overarching story. I'm thinking about arcs of the characters, theme. I'm thinking about the story as a big picture. I'm not getting into the nitty-gritty of what dialogue might read like. I'm not getting into the nitty-gritty of how a line sounds or grammar, anything like that. I'm looking at the story as a whole and trying to make sure that it works as one piece of art. When I'm thinking line editing, that's getting down into the nitty-gritty of how's the story flowing and how is the reader experiencing the story? Does the dialogue work? Does the dialogue sound good? Does the dialogue fit the characters? So
Mhm.
I'm also somebody who really cares about the cadence of the writing. I want it to flow in a certain way. And so I'm looking to make sure that my flow is fitting the mood of the story. It's fitting the character's point of view. The dialogue feels like it's coming from them. That's what I'm looking for on a line edit. And then when I get to proofreading, I'm looking at grammar.
Mhm.
Yep.
In a publishing house, if you're, and I know people watching this panel may very well be independently published or they may be self-publishing. That's totally great. Um, if you are working with a publishing house, you will most likely have rounds of edits, and those terms developmental, copy edit, line edit, and then proofreading and formatting are stages of the publishing process that your book will go through. And depending on the size of the publishing house, whether or not like an indie press like Falstaff that I work with, you are going to have a developmental editor and then the book's going to get passed on to a copy editor. There'll be different people because the press is big enough to do that. At the when the press was first starting out 10 years ago, often your editor would for all of those stages would be the same person. You'd keep passing the manuscript back and forth to each other and saying, okay, are we ready to move on to the next stage? At bigger publishing houses with more staff, the editors can get more focused on specific stages. So, for instance, my books, Lucy Blue is my developmental editor at Falstaff, and then I've had a few different copy editors, and Lucy is really good at the is your plot working, are your characters developed, are your themes meshing with the events of the story, and then Tuppence is um, she is brilliant at saying this word doesn't mean what you think it means, or you gave this character blue eyes on page 23, and on 29 and a half he has green eyes. Which is it? um so because forest trees, right? I after a while I'm like, I literally looked at my co-author the other day and I said, does this character have white wings or blue wings? I don't remember the last time they're fairies. The last time we mentioned them, it was 2 books ago, and now this character's back, and she's like, I don't know. We have to go look in the study, the Bible, of character lists that we have from our copy editors.
Yeah. Heather and Rachanee, do y'all have anything to add?
I concur.
Yeah, I think that as you know, someone who edits, you know, professionally for authors, I a lot of authors come to us not really knowing what the different kinds of editing are. So I thought it would be helpful to, you know, kind of define that for our viewers for sure. So thank
Yeah,
y'all.
definitely.
Um, all right. So what, when you all are editing your work, do you have any resources that you keep coming back to? Like, what are kind of the best resources that you found that can help you with the editing process? Let's start with Sarah this time.
So I love Deb Dixon's book Goal, Motivation, and Conflict. both for the plotting stage. I am a pantser who can't finish projects if I only pants. So I start as a pantser and then eventually I run into and I don't know what happens next and then I have to plot. Deb's idea of goal, motivation, conflict. At any point in your book, you need to know what is this character's goal, what's motivating them, and what's the conflict that's stopping them from moving towards their goal. Um, is a great way for it's really good rubric. It's very, and she lays it out with really clear examples for how to plan a book, but also how to edit your book, to ask yourself the right questions, especially in the developmental process when you have that first draft. The other book I really love is Self Editing for Fiction Writers. If you are, especially if you are new to publishing your own stuff, it lays out key terms like what is a beat in dialogue, that when I first read it, I didn't know any of these things. So I didn't know what some of the conventions in the language were. And it really helped me go, oh, this is why this scene or this, set of dialogue isn't working, because I need beats, which are action moments within a dialogue. So self-editing for fiction writers and goal motivation and conflict are two really excellent books.
It's not exactly, this would be more of an ongoing resource, but I really recommend being in a writer's group. I've led a writer's group. I've been in writers' rooms, and there's something about having other people to bounce ideas off of, to share your pages with. They'll catch things that you don't see. And the other nice thing is when you start working like with other writers, it just kind of helps you build that skill of self-editing. And this is also really random, but I came up through journalism and I still will do AP style instead of what is it, Chicago manual. So be aware of what style you're supposed to be using in your book. Go get the right one. Not that you can't use AP style in a fiction book, I'm just saying, but be aware.
For me, actually a few other resources I recommend are Save the Cat too, and similar to Sarah said, it helps you plot the beats of your novel too, just to make sure that you're tracking on pace, just so that like your midpoint is not 90% of the way through your novel, which happened to me on one of my drafts. So it's really just like making sure that your novel has structure. And then similarly to the book that Sarah referenced, Story Genius is another one that I found really helpful in making sure that you develop your characters' emotional arcs. And so that's what your readers will connect to. They'll connect to who your characters are and the journeys and the psychological journeys they're going through. And then two other resources that I find extremely helpful are Bryn Donovan's blog and Rebecca Mackay's Substack. And they both have a lot of really helpful craft tips for writers.
So I don't know if I have any more writing books to craft books to share, but I think the thing when I'm editing, I always have very close by are my research materials. So if I'm introducing something that's real life based, I have read a book on that. I have that nearby that I can reference. If I'm including characters that come from different cultures than I do, I think about what resources I have there to reflect to. There's a blog, Writing with Color, that I've used in the past to make sure that I'm being very thoughtful about how I'm describing characters of color or approaching culture in my books. And so making sure that those reference materials and those research materials are close by for when I need to do those research, when I need to reflect on that, I think can be very helpful.
Mhm. I'm glad you mentioned the Writing with Color blog because I was going to mention it if no one else did. It's very helpful, as a white author, and it's helpful for anyone, but like especially as a white author, we can have blind spots, and so that blog in particular is really helpful for being helping you be inclusive in your writing without accidentally being offensive. So, very helpful for sure. Um, all right. Thank you all. What are some of your best tips for newer authors looking to, get better at self-editing? What kind of advice do you have to share with them? Let's start with Rachanee this time.
AP, you actually mentioned it earlier, way early on. I don't write in Google Docs anymore, but when I did, I loved that comment feature to just note something and be like, I can come back to this later. Um, if you're writing a series, I do not have this, but having a Bible is helpful because I've had to reference and go, what did that character do, and what was their magic trait, and oh dear, I don't remember. So having references is good.
Mhm.
Um, and honestly, like whether you do, a year long of edits or you're like me and you just don't want to deal with it and you speed through it, like taking that break and then coming back and reading it aloud is just so helpful. And this might sound weird, but maybe have someone who doesn't normally read your genre read it and see what they can catch. See if it makes sense to them.
So I have a few tips that I tend to rely on a lot, and I think Sarah mentioned one before, which I tend to think of. If it's boring to you, it'll be boring to readers. If it's
Mhm.
confusing to you, it'll be confusing to readers. And I mean, you hear it all the time, but show don't tell is really important, and it is something that writers can fall into just while they're writing, especially when they're drafting. So instead of instead of, for example, saying she was so relieved, you would say something like her shoulders dropped and she let out the breath that she wasn't aware she was holding. Just something like that that describes the feeling in a more descriptive way. And then what has been really helpful for me is keeping a book journal. So just for you, not something necessarily needs to post on Goodreads, but it's you note down what you like and what you don't like in books that you read and books that you don't finish. And it helps you
Mhm.
identify different elements to put into your book and different things perhaps to not include in your book.
Yeah, I want to steal what Rachanee said in the last question. Join a group. Find other creative writers. Um, and especially when you're starting out, don't worry too much about if they're on your level or you're on their level. What you really need is creative community to keep you motivated and keep you writing. And you will learn from critiquing other people's work. Um, one of the, so in my day job, I teach writing, I teach college students. Um, One of the things that studies of writers have shown is that writers often don't know when they're doing something right either. Like writers can be overly self-critical and throw out the good stuff. And there's a real benefit to having a group of people go, no, I liked that scene. That worked for me. I want to know what happens to this character next. So we don't just give up on ourselves. And also I don't know if this works for everybody else, but the internal pressure of the group is meeting in a month. I need to submit something helps me get things done.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, the creative community is just invaluable, and it's important to find your people and talk to each other about books.
I would say the most important thing I know about self-editing is that you need to know yourself.
Mhm.
You need to know what you like. You need to practice writing more and more and more. The only way to get good at this stuff is by doing it. Um, Try short fiction, try different genres, try something smaller. Before I even touched a novel, I wrote poetry for about 7 years. It taught me a lot about editing and being economical with language and knowing what words I want to use, when there are rules I want to break, and when breaking rules would really work against me. Finding your voice is a hard thing to do. And
Mhm.
it's partly why I think self-editing is the most important type of editing, because your editor doesn't know your voice like you know your voice. Um, Only you do. So you can decide, no, that's a rule I want to break. That's what this character sounds like. That's how this narration is supposed to flow. The only way to take control of that is by understanding your own voice. And I think the only way to do that is really by writing a lot and trying a lot of different things.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing that I always suggest, like when our editing group, when we do workshops and like to my clients, I always tell people to practice by writing short fiction. That's how I kind of started as an author when I was like, okay, I wanna write books and like, but I don't really feel like I have the skill. And so that's how I started like building the skill is by writing short fiction. And because it's you can finish a short piece a lot faster than you can finish a novel. So like the time commitment is less, and you still get the good like craft practice at the same time. So.
I want to shout out NYC Midnight. Is anybody familiar with that?
Mhm.
So it's this competition that lasts 24 hours and they do several different lengths of fiction. I just did my first one this last month. It was a 100-word story. And you had a couple of thousand people that applied to that joined it. And you had 24 hours starting at midnight on Friday to come up with a 100-word short story. They gave you a genre, a an action, and a word that had to be included, and then you had to write some short story around that. I ended up writing my first 100-word romance. That's not a genre I typically am writing in. So it was fun to try out that skill set. I wrote with a couple of other authors, and so we bounced ideas off each other. It was really fun. It was over in 24 hours. The next round is starting this Friday. So I mean, it's a lot of fun. It was like 30 books to participate in it. And if you're really good, you can win some money, but otherwise you just get a great experience out of it. I really like that because I've never forced myself to write a story, a fiction piece in 100 words.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, trying to see how short you can go is a really good exercise, I find. Um, all right. So when you're self-editing, what are some like mistakes that maybe you've made in the past or like some common mistakes that you've seen from other authors in the self-editing process? Let's start with Heather this time.
So I think one common mistake for writers, especially when they're first starting out, is feeling like they have to take every piece of feedback that was given to them from their writing group or writing instructors. And that could feel very heavy and it can bog down your process thinking like, oh my God, I need to do all of these edits. And one of the best pieces that I received was from a writing teacher, actually Bryn Donovan, one of my writing teachers. And she always said, take what resonates with you and discard everything else. And I think that speaks a lot to what James said too about knowing your voice and trusting yourself too, because obviously, like if there are major plot holes and everyone says something like, "Oh, I didn't know she was bullied as a kid. That's why she does every single thing in the book." Maybe you need to fix that. But for more subjective criticism that's like more one-off, you can always put it aside. If it doesn't reflect you or your vision of the story or your characters, you don't have to act on it.
Mhm. Yeah, I always tell people to triage feedback. Like you
Mhm.
said, if everyone's saying the same thing, that's an important thing that you need to address. But if they're all saying different things, maybe it's less important. Um, Sarah, what about you? Some
Yeah,
common mistakes.
I really agree with what Heather said. I think common mistake, I know I've said it before in this panel, but forest trees, right? You have to be able to step back from your own writing, not be precious about the idea of your vision. The goal is to tell a good story first and foremost, and it's it is important to hang on to your own integrity as a writer. Like there's this balance point of what Heather was saying, like don't take everybody's advice all the time. Otherwise you'll just end up writing a mishmash of what other people want. But also you have to step back and say, is this working? um like there are there are books that are like classics of sci-fi that I also think would benefit from one more editorial pass. Um, somebody looking at the author and going, do we really need 5 pages of this? I'm not going to name names, but you need to find that balance there.
I think a lot of earlier writers suffer from an over adherence to rules that they've heard.
Mm-hmm.
So you hear show don't tell, and then your book is 20,000 words longer than it needs to be because you never tell us anything. Or you don't tell us any of the any of the background of the characters. You don't tell us any of the world building, and so we're like confused about what's going on because you haven't told us enough. Telling is a part of storytelling. Showing is a very important part of that, and the balance is where you strike a chord. So the we often prescribe editing tips that fit into a sentence when it really should be a paragraph of show don't tell except when you really need to tell, and here's when you need to do that, because that would not be something easy to pass around. Or you hear people quoting Stephen King and saying never use an adverb. Sometimes an adverb can be very helpful in a sentence. It is a part of grammar. They exist for a reason. Use them when you need them. So I would just say take the rules that fit as just like editing advice or advice on your story. Take the rules that fit and then discard the ones that don't, or find some nuance in them at least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Rachanee, what about you?
I would say that it is a muscle, and the more you use it, and the more you will learn to trust yourself, the more you use it. So like I keep pointing it the wrong direction. This one is my 8th book. Number 9 is done. I'm struggling through 10 right now. My first book, I was like, I don't know if this is okay, but now I've been doing it enough that I'm like, I trust myself over anybody else, even though like I have an editor and I love him, and I have other people who read my books and, we can go back and forth. In the end, I'm the author and I need to trust myself in this process. So the more you do it, the more you'll learn to rely on your skills. And you just got to work that muscle.
Yeah, for sure. So a few of y'all have brought up like writing groups and critique partners and things like that. So I want to ask, how do you incorporate feedback from like your beta readers or critique partners in your editing process? Let's start with James.
Sure. So what I typically do is my zero draft is just getting it on the page. Then I take a first draft where I'm cleaning that up and I'm making it readable. That is when I'm comfortable with having some alpha or beta readers, however you want to describe them, take a glance. And I get feedback once I have that all put together. I will organize that feedback by chapter, or if it's overarching feedback, I'll separate that out. So I kind of organize that. It's probably the most organized thing in my whole process because I'm a bit of a pantser myself with a little bit of other stuff going on. But I try to organize that feedback so that when I'm going through my story, I can incorporate those items as I'm moving through chapter by chapter. And then while I'm organizing, I'm also looking for that feedback that makes sense to me or does not make sense to me, and I throw some of it out, but I try to organize it so that it makes sense as I'm going through my next edit.
Yeah, for me, my process is similar. I take the feedback and then I let it sit with me too, just for a couple of days to like absorb it and process it and really think through how I like what I want to take and if so, how I want to incorporate it into my manuscript. And once I can see visually in my head how I want to do it, then I'll go into a printed copy of it and then mark it up too with all the sections that I want to change.
Mm-hmm.
Rashni, why don't you go before me?
I was like, if you guys want to go first.
I feel like I usually go first when it's the two of us, so please go ahead.
Pantsers unite! I love it. Like we're all Heather, are you a pantser also?
Nope,
No?
I'm a plotter. I'm
Oh
a
my
plotter.
gosh, the lone platter. No wonder you're
I think
starting
so.
working. Like all us pantsers are like in the void, like, what are we doing? So for me, when I'm in a writer's group, I usually kind of go by majority. So if a lot of people have the same feedback, I listen because obviously something's not working for them. But for my books, I just have the one editor that I work with. I've tried to get beta readers. I don't know, maybe I'm just not organized enough or something. I don't know. It just doesn't work. So me and my editor, we will actually duke it out. He is such a patient. Shout out to you, Tom, if you're watching this. He'll send me the notes and he'll be like, do you want to talk about it? And we'll get on the phone and I'll be like, okay, explain to me what you meant here. And I'll hear everything. And if it makes sense to me, I'll just change it on the fly. Because again, I don't want to think about it. And for me, and I've noticed this in my own personal writing process, having done writing rooms and stuff like that, I have to change it on the spot Otherwise, I'll forget what the note was. So that's just me personally, but other people I think are better about remembering things, which we've seen during this conversation. I don't remember half of what's going on. So that's just me. I got to figure it out on the spot. If I don't change it on the fly, it doesn't get changed.
I would say, and this is something that I've had to learn through painful experience, and I hope other people learn it less painfully. Learn to recognize the difference between a toxic critique group and a group that is telling you what you don't want to hear but need to hear at the moment, because there is a real difference. I was in a critique group where I was having a moment afterwards, and a friend who knew the same people said, well, that's just how critique goes. I always come out feeling like I've been mauled by a bear. And 20 years later, I want to say, no, if you're in a group that feels like being mauled by a bear, you need to leave that group and write alone rather than go back to them, because they'll kill your spirit. They'll kill your desire to write. And they may not know what they're talking about, or they may, but either way, they're not actually going to help you. Versus when Emily and I first started the Changelings Fall series, people consistently told us, she seems juvenile. Your main character seems immature for her age. And we had to figure out why. I did not like being told that, but they had a point. And it wasn't people who are like, oh, I'm so much better than you, I want to make you feel bad to make myself feel good. It was, yeah, your character's coming off this way. And then we had to go, why? So, the most productive critique groups. There's a book called The Company They Keep by Diana Glyer. It was nominated for a Hugo. And it's about creative writing community and what works, what doesn't. It's a study of the Inklings, Tolkien and Dorothy Sayers and Lewis and all those people. And what she found was that the creative writing groups that work the best in terms of sustained production and published manuscripts are the ones where they give each other very honest feedback, both positive and negative, but they build each other up. The members of the group want to see each other succeed. Groups that are too nice, like, oh, it's all great, it's all wonderful, we just pat each other in the back, they never finish anything, they never publish. And because they don't learn how to self-edit, they don't learn how to revise. And groups that are negative, just everybody quits. People give up entirely and leave writing, and there's a lot of broken dreams there. So yeah, find a critique group that is passionate and helpful, but not toxic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just building on what Sarah said too, I think that's important to remember when you're in a writing group, you will not connect with everyone's feedback, and some people may not understand your vision. And if there's one person in 3 classes that you've taken, stay in touch with that one person, and that will be a valuable reader, because good readers are hard to find.
Yes.
I would also say learn how to be a somebody that receives criticism well. Because if I'm the same way as Heather, like when I get my feedback from beta readers, I need to sit with it for a second, because sometimes things hit me and I'm like, oh, I don't feel good about that. But they said it for a reason. They're not there to hurt me. I need to learn how to take that better. But if I show up into a space of writers and they're trying to help me and I am defensive and I am punitive, like, oh, you gave me a critique, now you get a critique. If I show up that way, then I'm never going to be able to grow from that experience. And I'm also somebody's negative experience. So I think in addition to finding a good group, you also need to find a way to be a good group member.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we have time for one more question. So I want to ask you guys to kind of end on how do you know when you're done with self-editing? How do you know when a story, is finished, no longer needs to be edited? Let's start with Rachanee for this one.
Well, you already know I'm impatient. So I don't want to stress over like 20 million drafts or like 5 years later the book's not done. For me, I'm a deadline person. I came up in journalism, and I'm like, 6 months max. I don't want to do more than 4 or 5 drafts. I want this thing to be done and the audiobook done in 6 months and move on to the next project. Whether or not that's good or bad, I don't know, but it's for my own peace of mind. So I don't like stressing over it. So I mean, I guess like for me, I know it's done when I have nothing left to say. I have nothing left to edit. My editor doesn't have any more notes, or if they are, they're really minor, and they don't really make a difference to the story overall anyway. And then we're done. And I can just be like, cool, I can stress myself out with a new project.
Nice. Sarah, what about you?
I'd say it's done when I've written the best book I can write with the skill set I have now. Um, because if I write the best book I can imagine writing, it will never get finished, right? Or it'll be, polishing the rock for 10 years. The best book I could write 10 years ago was not as good as the best book I can write right now. I hope I keep getting better. But the book in progress right now has to go to an editor, because of my goal anyways, to get the stuff out there to get it published. So yeah, write the best book you can now and then go, this is as good as it's going to get now. We're moving on. Yeah, I like what Rachanee said about that.
Heather and James, what about y'all?
So for me, I feel like I don't know what this says about me, and it's probably because I'm also a newer author compared to the three of you. But for me, I knew that my book was done when I was reading it, and I was like, oh wow, it feels like a real author wrote it. It feels like a real book, and it's very strange to feel like that about your own writing and to get lost in your own story and be like, okay, this is good. This is very good. And for me, that was it. It's like when I had some detachment and could look at it and see like, okay, it's done. It feels good. It feels real.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a hard thing to know, because I don't know about y'all, but when I'm reading my own work, one time I'll be reading it, I'm like, I'm actually a good writer. The next time I'll be reading the same exact thing, I'm like, this is tr who did this? Somebody went into my document, they changed everything, and they ruined it. Um, it's hard to settle into oh, this is where it needs to be. But I agree that if you're searching for the best book you can ever write, you'll be the Patrick Rothfuss of the group, and you'll be 20 years later and you haven't finished your series. Um, and that's a hard place to be. You don't want to be in that space. So get what you can get out there. Fight the perfectionism within you. Learn to trust those people around you that you believe have your best interest at heart. And then understand that you'll read it 10 years later and there'll be some things that you love and some things you wish you had changed. But you're a better author 10 years later.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, thank you to all our wonderful panelists for participating in this conversation. I think we had a great discussion of self-editing and how authors can improve their skills. So now that we're wrapping up, I want to go around and give you all a chance once more to introduce yourselves. Let us know about your upcoming projects and where we can follow you on social media. Let's start with Sarah.
Okay, so I'm Sarah Joy Adams. Um, Sarah Adams is such a common name. So I use my middle name in publishing. You can find me on TikTok at changeling_writer, on Insta at Sarah_Adams_4732. And I am occasionally on Blue Sky, SJ Adams.
I'm James Lloyd Dulin, author of the Manitou series. No Heart for a Thief is my debut novel. I'm currently working on a novella series. The first one appeared in an anthology that just released called Ethos, and then I'll be continuing that on. You can find me at James L. Dulin on most platforms. So that's Blue Sky, Twitter, and TikTok. On Instagram, I'm James Lloyd 27 because I started that before I became an author, so it's not all consistent. I'm also at jamesldulin.com, where you can find a lot more about my work.
Okay. Heather?
I'm Heather Eng, and my debut novel, Double Happiness, is out now. And you can find me on Instagram at Heather Ang Writes.
Rachanee.
I'm Rachanee Lumayno. I pointed the right spot. My current novel is Seeing Red. It's first in a new series of dark gothic fairy tale retellings. Midnight Rose, which is Beauty and the Beast, will come out later this year. I also have the Kingdom Legacy series, a 7-book YA fantasy series complete. You can find me online on Instagram, YouTube, pretty much everywhere at Rachanee Lumayno. Online, rachanee.net. I also have a Discord for creatives and book lovers. That one you can find off my website as well. And yeah.
Great. Well, thanks again to all of our panelists. And for those of you in the audience, thank you everyone for joining us. That concludes our How to Level Up Your Self-Editing Skills panel. Remember to take breaks, hydrate, stretch, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye.